I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. Glad to be here and glad to have you along. Thanks to all of you listening here on KFAI. Thanks to the station for being a powerful conduit, a place that we connect, have rich, what I call robust conversations about the ideas and thoughts and strategies that connect us, that build us, that bind us. I'm pleased today to be reconnected with Black Press USA. So not only are we live on radio here in Twin Cities, but streaming nationally through Black Press USA Facebook page, and of course on the Insight News and McFarlane Media Facebook pages as well. Today's program is an exciting one for me. I'm interviewing a person I'm just now meeting, Jesse J. Holland, and he's joining me from Washington, D.C. And background-wise, the story is phenomenal. Jesse J. Holland is an award-winning author and journalist who is the author of the first novel featuring comics' most popular Black superhero, the Black Panther. In The Black Panther, Who is the Black Panther? Holland retells the classic origin of T'Challa, the original Black Panther, and updates it for the new century, giving new fans and longtime diehard aficionados a good platform and some inside information for the Black Panther movie from Marvel Studios. The novel was recognized with the NAACP Image Award nomination for Best Fiction in 2019. Jesse is an accomplished novelist, having also been trusted by Lucasfilm to chronicle the history of their newest Black hero in Star Wars, Finn, in the Star Wars young adult novel entitled Star Wars: The Force Awakens, Finn's story. There's more to say about him, and we'll get into that as we go. Brother Howard, good afternoon and good to see you, man.
Thank you so much for having me today, and great to see you, Al.
Well, let's talk about when I read your information, you sort of awakened in me this general curiosity of what I call Black or Afrofuturism.
Right.
I often wonder, how will the world look 100 or 1,000 years from now? How will what we do today be the source, the conduit, the thing from which the future is derived, and how much of our thought, intellect, genius will be imprinted in that future? And I worry that the future, as prescribed by so-called general or mainstream media, seems to continue to marginalize people that look like me. And I kind of don't accept that. And I think I shouldn't accept it. And so when I read about you and the way you're thinking, the way you're writing, the way you're doing media, and the way you're focusing on the future, I'm encouraged. So let me start with that. Let me ask you to introduce yourself to people that don't know you and your work.
Well, once again, thank you to everyone who's out there listening or watching. Once again, my name is Jesse J. Holland. I am, like Al said, the author of the first Black Panther novel, which was called Black Panther: Who is the Black Panther? And I am the editor of the newest Black Panther book, which is called Black Panther: Tales of Wakanda, which 18 great writers, including myself, came together and wrote our own stories of Wakanda. Some people chose to write about T'Challa. Some people chose to write about Shuri. Some people chose to write about Killmonger. But we brought these 18 great Afrocentric writers together, and we all came up with our own vision of Wakanda and our own story of Wakanda, including the great Nikki Giovanni, who came into this work and actually of the Black Panther. So go out there and pick it up. You can find it everywhere and you can find it on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, anywhere you buy your books. You can find Black Panther: Tales of Wakanda. I'm also the Saturday host of the Washington Journal on C-SPAN, which is a call-in talk show where America gets to talk about what it wants to talk about. And I'm also a professor of journalism in the School of Media and Public Affairs at the George Washington University. So as you can see, I'm a little busy, but I love doing it all. Now, back to your question about Afrofuturism.
Mm-hmm.
I am a longtime comic book and science fiction fan. In fact, the first movie I ever saw in a movie theater was Star Wars, the original Star Wars.
Really?
That was the very first movie I ever saw in a movie theater. And not to be dating myself, I was in first grade when I saw that movie in a movie.
You're a young guy.
Right, exactly. So I'll take that. Thank you.
Yeah.
But when we look at how science fiction and fantasy has been portrayed over the last 50 years, every time we see a major science fiction or fantasy movie or television show, there's usually only one black character, and that character is barely a side character.
Mm-hmm.
So their vision of the future is a future where we're still in the background.
Mm-hmm.
Afrofuturism is about writing a future where African Americans, where black human beings are not in the background, but they are the main characters. They are the heroes. They are the people who drive the narrative. We've spent so much time being pushed into the background. Several writers, including myself, want to see ourselves as the heroes of the story. Mm-hmm. And frankly, that was one of the things that draws me toward writing Black Panther so much, because it's a genre, it's a character, it's a narrative that's about Black people. Instead of being the Black people being the helpers, the scientists, the sidekicks, it's a story about Black people. And that's really what Afrofuturism is about, taking our story into the realm of science fiction, taking our stories into the realm of fantasy, taking our stories into the realm of the future, which is not something that other people have been doing for us. So there are a lot of great writers out there in the Afrofuturism genre who are writing our stories in these new worlds.
So do you think that our stories in the new worlds in the future will simply be variations on what our European and fellow humans do? Or is it likely, is it possible that we will bring something different, something unique, something still human, obviously? We share that with every other human on the planet. But is there an approach to what it means to be human, to what it means to be a steward of the resources of Earth, that may show up differently from our point of view, connecting both our sense of the origin stories that we have and how that connects with what eternity looks like? I think that's kind of the nexus there. What do you think?
It's not only a possibility, it's a certainty, because there are so many great stories that have not been told because writers of color, especially African-American writers, don't have access to the pipeline to get those stories told. This is why we see such great reaction to stories like Jordan Peele's Get Out. Mm-hmm. This is why we see such great reactions to stories like Ryan Coogler's Black Panther. Because while we're still using the classic archetypes of horror and superhero, mm-hmm. we're getting so much more meaning and depth from these stories because they're being helmed by people who are able to talk about more than just what's been talked about in the past. It comes out with such great depth and subtext where we don't see those same stories. Now, keep in mind, there are some people who will argue there are only 7 basic story types in the whole world. Mm-hmm. But it all depends on the storyteller. And when you have a person of color, a Black man or a Black woman telling these stories, you get a perspective that many people in the world have never seen. And for people like us, we've never ever seen reflected on screen. So while we may be using the same genres, I think you get a whole different style of story when you start involving Black people in the actual creation of the story.
And so what does that mean in the context of the emergence of places like Nollywood and the Ghana film enterprise, South African film, I think Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire have strong initiatives in film. What do you see coming out of those venues or those environments that reflect what can be and will be different as we advance in the technology and in the craft of filmmaking?
Well, one of the things that we're going to see, especially as these other centers of storytelling evolve around the world, is that we're going to be able to see some of these great stories told from perspectives that are unfamiliar to us. Now, one of the things that I always have to tell people when we talk about Black Panther is that keep in mind that this is a story told about Africans by Americans. So if you are looking for a true African story, Black Panther is not a great representation of a true African story. It's Africa as perceived by Americans, which is why we had back in the beginning when Stan Lee and Jack Kirby came up with this character. This is why we had those stories like coming out in books called Jungle Action. And while Ryan Coogler did a fabulous job of rewriting and reinterpreting this story, the same way that Reginald Hudlin did when he took over the comic book, rewriting and reinterpreting the story, Reginald Hudlin and Ryan Coogler are still Americans. And this is an American perspective layered over an African character. Now, how different would Black Panther have been if it had actually been written by an African? What perspectives would we have seen? Where would the story have changed? This is why it's great to see these African centers in Ghana, and great to see places like the Nollywood coming up, because that's really, for Americans, the only way we're going to see the perspective of others told in entertainment. Still to this day, America is the center of entertainment in the world. Most of the things we see come from an American perspective. What happens when these storytellers from other perspectives now have the ability to get their work in front of millions of people, including Americans? The same thing happens when African Americans have a chance to get their stories out into the world. We get a chance to see what the world looks like through someone else's eyes, whether good or bad. And I think that's a great thing. Whether you like the story or you don't like the story, it's always great to see that other perspective on these classic stories that we're seeing told over and over and over. And I think that's one reason why these stories aren't going stale and these stories are still fresh, because we're getting to see them through new eyes.
I'm Al McFarlane. You're listening to Conversations with Al McFarlane. My guest is Jesse J. Holland. He's an award-winning writer, journalist, and television personality, and the editor of the new Black Panther Tales of Wakanda anthology. He's also a father and the former race and ethnicity reporter for Associated Press. He has a unique perspective on the ongoing phenomenon of our times that brings insight into how Black men prepare their sons for what's become a dreaded situation, the police traffic stop. We'll get to that in a minute. But as you were describing a minute ago, Brother Jesse, perspectives, two images popped in my mind. One, in the realm of music that I think validate what you just said. Speaking of talking to the world from an American perspective, I think of hip hop as a current example of how global the vision, voice, impact of Black culture as articulated from within, the lived experience of Black people, how massive that is. And then another parallel coming out of not the US, but out of the African diaspora that has a global impact is reggae music.
Reggae.
From Jamaica. You could go back to calypso and maybe back from there to some of the African genres. But these musics demonstrate what you say, that what we're producing can reach and does reach and changes really the tenor and tone of culture all over the planet.
And you're 100% correct about that. I mean, I just think back a couple of years to the actual protests that went on in Hollywood, the Oscars So White protests.
Mm-hmm.
And just because these Black actors, actresses, producers, and editors stood up and said, hey, we're not being recognized for the work we're doing, all of a sudden we see actual recognition for people who've always been there. And the same thing goes when we start talking about talking about the influence of our art. Now, I'm more on the written word side than the music side, but I just spent time in the Caribbean just about a couple of weeks ago, and you can see the influence of not just America, but Black America pretty much everywhere. But it hasn't been talked about until recently. I was just reading up just right before we got on about the Paul Robeson and the influence that he had not only on art, but in sports that was wiped away because they weren't able to deal with an intelligent, upfront African-American man who knew what he was talking about. So what we're seeing now is finally there's some recognition of the influence that Black America has had on the United States when it comes to entertainment and art, but not just the United States, but the world. Because believe it or not, before the Black Panther movie came out, there was a real conversation about whether white Americans would go see a movie that had a Black lead superhero, but not just white Americans, would foreigners accept an African-American hero? It all sounds ludicrous now, $1 billion later, but keep in mind, this was only 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Where all of this was a question of whether this planet could accept being saved by a Black man. So when we talk about today that we're in a post-racial society, and when we talk about today that we don't understand why we can't see color, keep in mind this was only 3 years ago where there was a question of whether this was acceptable to a crowd that wasn't brown-skinned. So while we've come a long way, you have to keep in mind it's only been a short time, and really there are some of us who still are concerned about us regressing back to that time again.
Well, it's a testament, unfortunately, to the pervasiveness and perniciousness of white supremacist thought, and to the reign of white supremacy, at least for the past 300 to 500 years. But I think it also indicates that, like the opening song said, it's time for reparations, and it's not negotiable anymore. The change that is afoot is change that is both inevitable and change that is at hand. It's not a far distant. So that's how I see it anyway. And so you point out the fact that the environment that this question is being raised in is one that reflects a history of intent. And the intent is to keep our people down-pressed, downtrodden, subservient, and at the margin of progress, I think. So where were you in the Caribbean? Where'd you go? What'd you do?
Puerto Rico.
How'd you enjoy that?
Oh, I had a ball. I actually took my entire family to Puerto Rico a couple of weeks ago. We normally go down to the Caribbean once every 2 to 3 years. We normally go to Turks and Caicos or Jamaica.
Okay.
But this year in this coronavirus world, we decided to stay within the umbrella of the United States. And so we went to Puerto Rico for the second time. And we really, really enjoyed ourselves.
Tell me about Puerto Rico. I've been there once when I was a kid. I was in the Navy and was in a ship that docked in San Juan. So my Puerto Rico experiences as probably a 18-year-old sailor docking in old San Juan and enjoying it immensely, discovering that Puerto Ricans looked more like me than anybody else. I was so surprised. I was so surprised to see cats that looked just like me and my cousins all up and down the street. So much so, Jesse, that I think our second day of shore duty, I went to somewhere and bought some civilian clothes, put my uniform in a locker, and went out and hung out on the corner, right? And I had a little bit of Spanish language under my belt. And so when the shore patrol came by, looking at everybody because you're supposed to be in uniform, I just played it off and said, I don't understand English. And they walked on by. So I said, this is amazing. So I can blend here and I can belong here. It's a good feeling.
Well, our first experience in Puerto Rico actually came with my wife, who was also in the Navy and was stationed in Puerto Rico for a while. Okay. And then I went down to Puerto Rico with her a few years later. And like I said, this time we took our entire family with us. I will admit that we stayed pretty much close together this time. Once again, we're traveling in the middle of COVID-19. Yeah, sure. Even though all of us are vaccinated, we're trying not to take unnecessary risks.
Right.
But like you said, it's always surprising to see people who look like you in a country where you didn't think they were.
Right.
So it was I'm not gonna say it was a shock. It was surprising to our children to see people who look like us when we're walking through old San Juan, when we're going through the forts in San Juan and Carolina. It's always amazing to see how people of African descent can be found in just about every country on the planet. I've spent time in China, Japan, Kazakhstan, Italy, and everywhere I go, there are always people of African descent in those neighborhoods. We might not see them in the tourist brochures. We might not see them in the television shows. But if you go to these cities, you will find people who look like you. People who are warm and welcoming, people who understand and have that same perspective that you do. Now, I will tell you one of the things that is so far the biggest regret of my life is that I've only spent 1 day in Africa.
Okay.
And that was in Morocco. I spent 1 day in Morocco as I was changing planes on the way to Kazakhstan. So that is actually on my list, my bucket list, is to be able to go to the original source of our people and be able to commune with those who are from our homeland.
You will love it. I guarantee you. I've spent a lot of time in Africa, and I can tell you it's rewarding and rich. It's a good experience. But, your point is exactly correct. My wife and I went to Acapulco, Mexico. My daughter won us a trip at a kind of drawing. So we went to Acapulco with a bunch of people from Minneapolis and St. Paul, white people who lived up to the description of the ugly Americans because they were rude and embarrassingly so. We didn't want to be associated with them because they were so rude and so uncouth. And, but they felt normal in being arrogant, rude, dismissive. And so it was, that was the bad part of it. But we were in the hotel and saw a brother, he worked at the hotel, and the guy looked like Leroy from around the corner. So I said, hey, man, what you doing here? How you doing? How you doing, man? He said, ¿Qué? And so brother didn't speak English. I spoke Spanish. Come to find out, he was born there. That's where he's from. Been there several generations, and that was his neighborhood. So that tells you the same thing. You know, that our people are everywhere. I ran into some brothers in St. Petersburg in Russia.
In Russia,
yeah, and some brothers in Moscow, and just amazing. So it's wonderful to see our people everywhere. Did you know this guy, this brother historian named I think his name is Rashidi Renoko? Do you know him?
No, I don't.
So he was a historian. I just saw him on some newscasts a couple of days ago where he just died. He was giving tours in Egypt. That's what he did, did guided Black history or African civilization tours around the world. And what he's done over his lifetime is gone to, you know, China, India, Indonesia, different communities, and discovering the presence of African people, and in Japan. And so all of that means a lot and says a lot. It means that we need to connect differently. I talk often, Brother Jesse, about in America, we're not conscious of the fact that the largest number of people of African descent are not here in New York, Philly, Chicago, LA, Atlanta, but rather in Brazil, South America, right? So somehow we have been the product of division that is consistent and global and effective, means that we refuse to see the expanse of our existence in ways that would add to the impulse towards self-determination and freedom. And we've been sort of put blinders on, right? That hide from us the truth of our strength in a global sense. And so what you are doing and what you're talking about is one of the pathways to reignite the imaginations of our people and to reconnect us in ways that we can discover what we once have done, we can do again, and we can do things that are magnificent for the future. That's what I think. And what are your thoughts on this whole idea of identity and being connected and figuring out how we motivate and what's the right word, spark each other into our best selves?
Well, you're bringing up something that I was literally thinking about just as you were saying this. That was the great thing about being involved with Black Panther, the Black Panther universe. It seemed to bring out the Black culture in just about every country in the planet, where we would see people of African descent come out and say, yes, finally, there's someone on screen that looks like us. Let's take this momentum and try to do something with it. I actually talked with a group of people who in Africa who were saying to themselves, why is Wakanda fictional? Why can't we create a Wakanda of our own? And that same movement came to America. It was like, why can't we create a Wakanda here? There is nothing that stops us from making these dreams into reality but us. All it takes is just someone to say, let's do it, and someone to say, why can't we do it? And especially nowadays, now where we have this fabulous form of communication, where we can not only hear each other's voices, we can see each other's faces from across the country or across the world. There's no reason for us to not be able to take this momentum that we've seen from characters like the Black Panther, the momentum we've seen from movie makers like Jordan Peele, the momentum that we see from people like Barack Obama, and not only starting national movement, but an international movement where we can come together as a people and move toward the betterment of our own lives. One of the things I talk about a lot is that for way too many years, we've had to depend on others to make our life better. Now it's time for us to take what we have and use it to better ourselves. Whether it's entertainment, whether it's art, whether it's politics, whether it's movies, whether it's music, all of this is in our hands. And it only takes the will to get something done that's stopping us from using this material that we have and making our own lives better.
I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. My guest today is Jesse J. Holland. He's an author and educator. He teaches at George Washington
University.
Right. And also is nominated for the NAACP Image Award 2019. His latest project, one of his latest projects, is the new Black Panther Tales of Wakanda anthology that has a number of people imagining what the future can be. Let me ask you about your own personal story, where you've grown up. And I noticed you're from Holly Springs, Mississippi.
Yeah, that's what we say in polite conversation, that I'm from Holly Springs, Mississippi. In reality, I'm from just about 15 miles outside of Holly Springs. I grew up on a cotton farm in Mississippi, which when I grew up, it was called Rural Route 2.
Okay.
So I tell people Holly Springs because that's the closest place you can find on the map to where I actually grew up.
My wife's family is from Crystal Springs, Mississippi, which is near Jackson, and I've grown to love Mississippi because of the visits with her family there. My own family, my mom's side of the family, is from a place called what's the name of it? Itabena,
Mississippi, home of Mississippi Valley State University, the Delta Devils.
Right. So that's where my mom's side of the family is from, and both sides of my maternal side, my wife's side, give me an admiration and a respect for the people in Mississippi. I love being there more than I love being in Minnesota. And I'm okay with Minnesota, but I think it's a better life potentially for Black people in Mississippi. That sounds counterintuitive, but it's true. We're joined by Brenda Lyle Gray. Brenda Lyle is a writer and author as well. She writes the stories from these interviews, and I asked her to jump on the call just to connect with you. She's also an author and always brings good questions, good energy to our interviews. Brenda, good afternoon. How you doing?
Hi,
I'm
Brenda.
fine. And I have been taking notes off of YouTube until I could get in. And I just love Black Panther. I keep my video very close.
I understand exactly what you mean. I've seen that movie, I guess, more than 24 times now.
It was fabulous.
And I'm eagerly awaiting the sequel.
Well, I am too. And I just love some of your writing. I have a prodigy who is like 30 years old, and we did a book together, which was with superheroes. It's called Aces for Kids, The Adventures of Aces for Kids. And they're superheroes with morals. One's called Deuce, one's called Love, and one's called Match. And it's taken from tennis because he's a tennis coach.
I got it now.
And they're wonderful. And I'm just thrilled. We're still trying to get it out there, and we were close, but COVID hit.
COVID changed everything.
It changed
Literally
a lot.
changed everything. Speaking of Mississippi, Al, I'm actually going down to the Mississippi Book Festival in a couple of weeks in Jackson, Mississippi. And right now, that is the only public appearance I am making in person this year because of coronavirus.
Right.
There were so many things that I had planned for 2020 and 2021, but making sure that I'm not bringing coronavirus into my house, making sure that my children don't get sick and my mother-in-law don't get sick, and frankly, and I make sure I don't get sick, has been the priority for the last year, where a lot of things that should have happened 2 years are now being pushed forward a couple of years. So when people ask me when am I going to have my next book out? Well, yeah, it was supposed to be this year.
Yeah.
I was also supposed to be able to go out and interview and research with people. And I decided that, you know what, it's probably better for me to stay safe and push everything back than it is for me to try to push forward with these projects and end up accidentally causing someone in my house to be sick.
We have to remember everything has a time and season. So
true.
There we are. And we're hurting. I'm sorry, Al. I just saw some statistics on African Americans and vaccinations, and it's really sad.
And we can't let that pass without me agreeing with. I just went my long delayed physical because I really didn't want to go to my doctor's office because I was afraid that people there might be sick. I just had my long delayed physical yesterday.
Yeah.
And my doctor, who's a 50-year-old African-American woman, was just telling me she just lost 2 of her African-American patients to COVID just in the last 2 weeks.
Wow.
Was that from the variant?
She didn't tell me all that.
She didn't say.
But she said they hadn't been vaccinated. And I was like, we hear these people on television, and I think a lot of us assume that the people who are not getting vaccinated are these conservative Trump supporters. And she was like, no, these are people who look like us who are still refusing to get the vaccination. And they're going to be the next ones who are in the ICUs, on the ventilators, and possibly dying. So if you're out there and you haven't had your coronavirus vaccine, please go get it. You're playing Russian roulette with your life if you don't get the vaccination. So, and even if you think people are out to get you, the government's out to get you, I guarantee you the coronavirus is out to get you. I can guarantee that. That is not a rumor. So please get your shot. If you're able to get your vaccine, please go get it.
That's a good way to put it too.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And we're promoting that all day, every day. We do this program 5 days a week on social media. And one of our themes is making sure that our people are knowledgeable, conversant, and comfortable making the right decision. The right decision is to get vaccinated, number one, and to follow all of the protocols, follow the science, and to do all you can to make sure that you are safe and that you are not putting other people at risk as well. Let me go back to your growing up in Mississippi.
Right.
Talk about growing up in Mississippi in that community and how your path led you to the University of Mississippi.
So my path is actually a little bit divided because I'm one of those weird kids who started out in the inner city and ended up on a farm. So my parents actually are from the area where they live now, right outside of Holly Springs, Mississippi. But when I was born, they moved from Holly Springs to Memphis, Tennessee. So I actually, from age -1 through age 8 or 9, grew up in Orange Mound in Memphis, Tennessee. So Orange Mound is one of the first historical Black neighborhoods in Memphis, and one of the major Black neighborhoods in the South. So I grew up in Orange Mound, but when I hit 8 or 9, my parents decided that they wanted to go back home. So my father built a house a mile away from his father's house in the middle of a field. So that's where I ended up growing up from age 8 through leaving to go to college. Now, both of my parents, luckily for me, were college graduates. My father actually graduated from Mississippi Valley in Itabena. That's why I know exactly where Itabena is, because that's where my dad graduated. My mom graduated college from Holly Springs, Mississippi, a now closed college called Mississippi Industrial. My mom always wanted to be a writer. But when she was coming along in Mississippi, there was no realistic path for a young Black girl from Holly Springs to become a writer. So my mom became an English teacher. And in fact, my mom was my 7th and 8th grade English teacher at H.W. Byers High School in Mount Pleasant, Mississippi. So I got my love of writing and reading from my mom. So my dad was taught shop. He taught woodworking in shop. And then when they phased out the shop classes, my father went back and got his science degree and started teaching science. But throughout that whole time, he also continued to farm. My father still farms outside of Holly Springs to this day. So I got my determination from my dad, because if you know anything about farming, farming isn't easy. So especially being a Black farmer in Mississippi is not easy. So when I got ready to go to college, my mom had to go back and get her master's degree to continue teaching in Mississippi. But she had 2 children, myself and my older sister, Twala. So the only time she had to go get her master's degree was in the summer. So from age 8 to about age 12, my mother would take my older sister and me with her to the University of Mississippi, the education department. She would take us to the library in the education department. She would say to us, "Stay here." And she would go take her classes. So my sister and I would stay in the library while she was taking her morning classes. We would come back and get us at lunchtime. We'd have our brown bag lunch in the car. We would change into swimsuits. She would take us to the outdoor swimming pool at Ole Miss, and we would take swim classes until she finished her evening classes. So for 5 years, while my mom worked on her master's degree, I was on Ole Miss's campus every day of the summer, the whole day.
That's amazing.
So when it came time for me to go to school, the campus I was the most comfortable with was the campus of Ole Miss. I already knew where everything was, because believe me, Al, we didn't exactly stay in the library while she was in class. We didn't exactly stay in the library.
You started off in the library, but once you got
we may have wandered a little bit. So I knew where everything was at Ole Miss, and at that point, I already knew I wanted to be a journalist. And the only journalism program in the entire state of Mississippi at that time was at Ole Miss. So I decided to go to Ole Miss, where I got my journalism and English degrees.
You went on to get a master's degree?
Yes, I went on to get a master's degree, but I was one of those knuckleheads who didn't listen when they said you should get all of your degrees at once. After spending 5 years as an undergrad in Oxford, Mississippi, I decided it was time to me to see something else. So I did not listen to those people who said, "Why don't you go ahead and get your master's degree now?" So I waited. So I finally got my master's degree in 2012 from Goucher College here in Towson, Maryland. So I have a master's in fine arts and creative nonfiction.
And you've got an honorary doctorate? Is that what it is? Or is it a doctorate?
It's an honorary doctorate. I got to do the commencement address for one of my hometown schools, Lamoille Owen College in Memphis, Tennessee. And they conferred upon me an honorary doctorate of humane letters.
So what was your feeling like with Ole Miss's reputation, having been the center of the quest for opportunity in higher education a generation before? How did that play into what you knew about that campus life experience, and your future in an environment that sometimes is hostile? I understand that right now Oxford is really one of the places to be. As I've watched the documentaries, my wife and I say, you know what? I think we could probably live well in Oxford. It's probably a good town, a lot of good people, challenging, good conversation, good wine, just a place to hang out, good food. Yeah. And so that's my image of Oxford right now, but it wasn't always that way.
It was not always that way. I entered the University of Mississippi in 1989. And within the first month of me being at Ole Miss, one of the white fraternities on campus decided that it would be hilarious to tie up some of their own pledges, drive them to Holly Springs, Mississippi, to Russ College and HBCU, and drop them off on campus tied up with "We hate N-word" written on their chest.
Wow.
That was my introduction to life at the University of Mississippi. But what I will tell you is that while Ole Miss deservedly has its reputation that it will never lose because of what happened to James Meredith, during my time at Ole Miss, I discovered that it's not just a reputation that matters. It's the actions that people take around you. While Ole Miss, once again, has that reputation and deserves it, the university has made great strides in acknowledging its place in history and attempting to make sure that that reputation is no longer deserved. While I was at Ole Miss, we had the first Black Miss Ole Miss. We had the first African-American editor of the student newspaper. We had the first Black dean of a school at Ole Miss. So while Ole Miss is not perfect, and nowhere in the country is perfect, the thing that I give the University of Mississippi credit for is that it acknowledges its place in history and says that that will never happen again, because we are going to make the effort to ensure that all people are welcome on campus. All people have an opportunity for an education. All people have a chance to better themselves. We will no longer be the barrier. We are going to be the ones who help this country move forward. Oh, a lot of times people don't want to talk about the past. People say, why are you bringing this stuff up? Ole Miss acknowledges what it did to James Meredith and the people who came before him. There's a statue to James Meredith on campus now. Ole Miss acknowledges his place in history, doesn't hide from it, and says, we're going to be better. And that's what I really appreciate and I love. That's why I go down to campus pretty much every time I'm in Mississippi, because Ole Miss acknowledges what it was and says, we're going to do better from now on.
Do you think that feeling is across the board in Mississippi? Does Mississippi?
Oh, absolutely not. Oh, absolutely not. People are going to be people no matter where you are. And honestly, that's people have the right under the U.S. Constitution to be racist. But they can that rights, your rights stop where my rights start. So you're never going, if you're waiting for a nirvana, it's never going to happen. But what we need is enough right-thinking Americans to say, how many minds have we wasted because of discrimination and racism and sexism and homophobia? Think about all of the great things our country could have now if we had utilized the brains of African Americans from 1619 through 1960. How many minds did we waste? How many inventions have we given up? How many fortunes have not been made because we as Americans did not acknowledge the humanity of people in our own country? I think that's one of the things that places like Ole Miss have acknowledged and said, we're no longer going to waste the talents of our Mississippians. But not everybody is on this train. There are some people out there who still say that they're the superior race, everybody else should be discriminated against. You're always going to have those people. As long as there are more of us than there are of them, I think we'll move forward. Because I think that way of thinking is going to die out eventually.
Well, I see us winning, and I think winning is in the cards for us. And winning for us, Brother Jesse, may not mean what it meant for everybody else earlier. My winning doesn't necessarily mean that somebody else has to lose.
Right, exactly.
I think there's a way of winning that means just that. Everybody can win. And I think that's the gift, the genius that we can bring to the equation of life and living. And I think that, that is not going to be given to us, that responsibility, that work. We have to take it on. We have taken it on. And our presence here has moved America closer to the premise and promise of democracy that it so woefully failed of its own accord but for us, but for our presence and our insistence. So I think we have a role, and the role is critical not only for this country, but for the planet. Let me ask you in the last couple of minutes here to put on your dream hat again. I'm just interested when you go to sleep or sit back in your chair and think about the future. Maybe your thinking is extraterrestrial or interstellar, or maybe it's thinking about how we discover ways to go inside the spaces that we have now. If there are modalities of existence that are in the same place and time, but unseen and unknown at the moment, where does your mind take you? And what do you see as pathways to the full realization of what it means to be alive, to be part of creation?
Well, here's the weird thing is that I now see more of a future for my children than I do for myself. Not that anything's going to happen to me, but when I think about things, I think about, well, where will my 14-year-old daughter be 20 years from now? Mm-hmm. Where will my 13-year-old son be 20 years from now? How will their lives be? Will they be taking space shuttles to the moon? Will they be will the Space Force, when they grow up, be the preeminent part of American military? What's going to happen with them? And I think that is first of all, let me say, it's a weird shift in my head where when I think about the future, I'm not thinking about mine anymore. I'm thinking about theirs and about what they're going to see and what they're going to experience, how the world's going to treat them more than how the world's going to treat me. So when I sit back and I think about the future, I think about where my children are going to be, what the things that they're going to see and experience that I can't even think of right now. And especially when I sit down and I talk to them about things like rotary telephones, about how our parents told us in a thunderstorm, don't use the phone because you could be hit by lightning. And they were like, how are you going to be hit by lightning? There's no cords on the phone. I'm like, you don't even know that there used to be corded phones.
Yep.
You've never seen a dial on a television where it only went from 1 to 12 and a bottom dial where you had to try to tune it to the right spot. You've only known remote controls. You've never had your father come call you and say, come turn the television. It's when you think about it, that's really what Afrofuturism is about. It's about envisioning a future, not just for yourself, but for the people who come after you. And being a father, the people I think about most are the future of my children. But when we start envisioning a future and thinking about ways that things can be better, we don't have to wait for that future. We can start making that future happen today. The things that we think about, when I think about, hey, well, maybe my daughter one day can be an astronaut. Well, why can't I get her in STEM classes now? Why can't I send her to space camp now? Why does this have to be a dream? It doesn't have to be. I can make her ready for that now. If my son wants to be a writer, my son's told me he wants to be a writer. And I'm like, well, let's start writing the book now. We don't have to wait until after college. Let's do it now.
That's right. Listen, we're out of time. We got about 30 seconds. We'll take the last 30 seconds to promote your new book. How do people name the name and how people can get it?
All right. So the book is called Black Panther Tales of Wakanda. You can always find more information at my website, which is www.jessejholland.com. And I'm always talking about my new stuff on Facebook and on Twitter. You can find me under Jesse J. Holland on both platforms and pretty much all platforms.
Jesse Holland, thank you so much. Good to meet you. Let's stay in touch.
Definitely.
Keep up the good work. Brenda, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll see you later. I'm Al McFarlane.
Really inspiring.
Thank you for listening and thank you for watching. We'll see you later. Take care.
Thank you.
Oh, Queen Justice, where are you? Did they beat beat you up or no, lock you underground, take the crown away from you.
Oh, Lady Liberty, red, white, and blue. Did they take your dignity with their bigotry? Teach you that you're born to lose.
Free or guilty, it's gonna get filthy. Better believe, roll up your sleeves. It's gonna get rough, it's gonna be tough. We all agree, we've had enough.
We've had enough
Of all the rules you break,
We've had enough.
of all the money you make.
We've had enough.
No more life at stake.
We've had enough.
This is a proclamation.
It's been 400 years and we're 400 late. Together we stand from state to state. Going back in time won't make America great. We need justice now, people won't wait.
Action, no more distraction. Every step we take, we gain traction. If it can happen to one, it can happen to all. United we stand, divided we fall. Free or guilty, it's gonna get filthy. Better believe, roll up your sleeves. It's gonna get rough, it's gonna be